Hello, you're about to hear Good Morning Seminole, our monthly signature event. Please enjoy.
We have an incredible speaker today, and I want to make sure that the Congressman has plenty of time to share with you. I also want to thank all of you who submitted your questions online before the event. We will get to as many of them as we can after we hear from the Congressman, but I don't think he needs any introduction, but please welcome our newest Congressman from District 7, Cory Mills.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the warm welcome. I'm not going to try and speak too long. I want to really get to the questions and be able to address things because, I mean, that's one of the main reasons that we're here. But I do want to touch on a couple of key pieces that I think is important to this body and to this chamber. You know, business is something that's very near and dear to my heart, as well as for continuing to empower that entrepreneurial mindset. As a former business owner myself, I'm sure that I face a lot of the same challenges and struggles that many of you face when it comes to overregulation, when it comes to federal government and their burdensome path that actually stifles job creation, even though they think that they're actually job creators. You know, it's one of those things where making sure that the necessary capital and the necessary capabilities exist to allow business in the private sector to grow on its own. And I think that this is something which has been impeded for a very long time. You know, I'll talk a little bit on the history of things, and I'm a constitutionalist, so I'm really big on the 7 articles and 27 amendments which govern us. But I really look at the 17th Amendment. How many people are familiar with the 17th Amendment in 1913? A couple of you. Don't worry, there will be a test later. So a lot of people don't realize that prior to 1913, the 17th Amendment, our United States senators actually was not elected by the people. They were elected by our state legislators. And the reason that they were elected by our state legislators was to ensure that that federal reach and that federal overgrowth, when a bill comes to pass, did not encroach upon the 10th Amendment. And I won't ask for who knows that one yet. But our 10th Amendment was one of the most important, which is our state and individual rights. And you see, it was very difficult because back then, the idea of politicians electing politicians wasn't exactly a popular thing. But when the 17th Amendment passed, known as the popular vote, what you saw is this hockey stick-like trajectory of federal growth and federal overreach and continual violations into our 10th, our state and individual rights, if you will. And this is a real issue for businesses. You know, we look at the ideas of what promotes us and how do we grow, how does America stay strong, how do we empower our republic? And I'll be the first to tell you that it's through economic development. Yesterday, I had the great opportunity of continuing, and each time that I'm in the district and back home, I like to meet with various businesses. And I wanted to just comment on a few things as we just heard from one of the new members with regards to childhood cancer. You know, I'm very proud of the businesses that we have here in Seminole County. And especially, I met with a business yesterday called Decimal. And Decimal is a business that is exceptionally niche, and they focus on pinpointing, utilizing proton and electron-based processing to help with cancer treatment. You know, before, we used to put someone through cancer treatment, and if they had something that was a brain tumor or something in the jaw, you'd kind of blast through the whole area. And now we have the ability to not only pinpoint it, but to determine through whether or not the best utilization is through electron or proton treatments. Now, I didn't know a lot about these types of things. I ran defense companies and helped to support law enforcement and military in my businesses. But in learning these types of things and what our businesses were doing here in the Seminole County area, I felt really empowered to try and do more and honored to be able to represent businesses such as this. You know, I was even able to sit with a gentleman yesterday who was a prior military veteran, and being a U.S. Army combat veteran myself, it's nice to see the engagement from our military to get back into our communities. And I just had the pleasure of meeting with VEI, and I'll tell you that's a phenomenal program regarding, you know, how do we integrate, how do we get our veterans back into our communities to socially integrate, but also to be at a community base. And I think that entrepreneurship and leadership is really fundamental to who we are as military veterans. But I met with this business yesterday at Millennium who they outfit various RVs. And this gentleman, he was born in Puerto Rico. He came here to serve in the United States military, served in the 160th, which is a Special Operation Aviation Regiment, and then came back and wanted to do something for his family by not kind of perpetuating this cycle that his family had come from, where his father was an alcoholic and his mother was kind of this single mother raising and taking care of the children. And as a result of his entrepreneurial mindset and his willingness to go into it, he now actually goes into the schools and helps with not only just understanding about business and what you can do, but actually even rewarding those who, if you get an A, you get $25. If you get a B, you get a $20. And he's done this so many times that he's actually enabled certain kids to be able to go through and him pay for colleges. You know, these are great things when we're able to utilize our entrepreneurial mindsets, when we're able to think about the next generation, the next evolution of growth. And these are things that I seriously want to continue to empower. Now, I want to just kind of talk a little bit about legislative updates. We talked about, and in the invocation, it was perfectly laid out because we talk about things like the ability to listen. And that's one of the things as an elected official that we should do a lot more of. Far too often, we go to D.C. and we get really wrapped around the federal legislative piece of things, and you forget about the community and the local development stuff. But when I went to D.C., my whole purpose was not just to go back to public service and to be a statesman, not a politician, but to actually be able to be a representative. Criminality, family, economic growth, national security, these are all things that we truly care about. These are the tabletop and kitchen table issues, the things that we talked about briefly in the invocation. Sanford has a very, very unique opportunity, in my opinion. And everyone who's traveled and been through the Sanford International Airport understand the importance of this hub for our community and how it could grow. When I went to visit the Sanford Airport, I looked at how do we grow this in a way, because the original idea was to try and almost make it a competition with MCO as a result of trying to have another tourist hub or another, and that's not really what we want here. And after talking to him, I realized that one of the most unique things that it has is a railway, all the different commerce sector areas, the ability to build up businesses and to make it a true business hub that serves the community, serves the district, and serves Florida. And that's why when I went back to D.C. and understanding what their needs were, I was proud to allocate and appropriate over $5 million that's going to come back into the Sanford International Airport and allow us to serve the business communities here at home. And in addition to that, one of the things that we do isn't just legislation, and I will get my ledge update, I promise, but it's also about what do we do to actually serve the people and the constituents. Now, I've only been in office for around 70-plus days, but I can tell you that in that 70-plus days, I've been blessed with not only empowering our team to do amazing services for getting SSI benefits and VA appointments, but also helping with the children that are in the communities. Now, having said that, we've actually, to date, since taking office, our office has now got $1.365 million in SSI disability and VA back pay benefits to the constituents of the 7th District. And I'm very proud of what our team has done. We've engaged with over 25 different families out of the 436 Civil Affairs Battalion in Sanford who are disconnected from TRICARE. Again, health care, housing affordability, these are things that impact every one of us here. And when we talk about the criminality, we're very blessed here in Seminole County because we truly do have an amazing sheriff with Sheriff Dennis Lima. And we're blessed here in the state of Florida to have that. But I would also say we're exceptionally blessed. Warren Buffett used to say that if you were born in America, you won the lottery. And I always understood that as a soldier who had traveled to so many countries. The only thing I think I would add to that, however, is that if you were born in Florida, you definitely hit the jackpot. We have the greatest governor in America. We have a strong economy that can continue to grow. And I can tell you that we will continue to try and remove federal overgrowth, federal overreach, the burdensome path that we take. And we will continue to try and empower businesses. And this is a top priority, I can tell you, for the 118th Congress. For far too long, we've heard things like shovel-ready jobs and stimulus of the economy and growth, but it's actually just additional spending and inflationary spending that is out of control and unchecked. Because if we allow the private sector to do what it's actually supposed to do, providing the necessary capital and ensuring that it's not overburdened with regulations, the economy would be stronger than it's ever been. And we saw this during the industrial age. And so one of the things that we're looking at is, how do we continue to have a robust economy? Because the reality is that in order to have a strong America, in order to be a global leader, we can't just look at things from a military perspective. We have to think about our economic growth and our perspective of being able to onshore jobs, identifying the issues that we have with supply chain and being able to bring that back home, understanding that we have workforce shortage issues and we have to address this, but also destigmatizing the idea that a 4-year brick-and-mortar degree is somehow more important than the tech, trade, and vocational schools that we really need to be driving as a key forefront to what builds America. These are the things that matter. And when I went across the district and I talked to all the businesses, it's the exact same issues across the board. It's workforce shortage issues because the federal government has actually created a system whereby the stimulus checks and other things are in direct competition with the private sector, increasing our actual ability to, are decreasing our ability to look out into the pool of workforce capability, but also having to increase our costs, which just gets transferred back into the consumer. And so when we look at all these things, we think about, how do we strengthen this? Well, I look at the biggest primary thing, and I was a geopolitical analyst for a while. I've published about 38 different articles on things like the great superpower resurgence, on things like looking towards the Middle East, on things like looking at economic growth and looking at national security matters. But we know that we have a real issue as a regard to China. Now, I sit on the House Foreign Affairs Committee and the House Armed Services Committee, and I'm the Vice Chairman of Africa for the Foreign Affairs Committee. We are engaged, whether we like it or not, in an economic resource and cyber warfare against China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and their geopolitical alignment. And make no mistake about it, they want to go ahead and create their own hegemony without ever having to fire a single shot, because they're attacking us through economic warfare. The expansion of Ukraine, a lot of people think is something to do with the former Soviet Union or the prevention of NATO as in Article 5. But the reality is that Chairman Xi had said that in order to achieve the needed economic development that he was wanting for the Road and Belt Initiative, that he needed Eurasian expansion, Africa, and Oceania. Now, why is that important to us? Well, if you take Africa, Oceania, and expand the Eurasian border to take things like Mariupol and the Black Sea and Moldova, you can now cut off the entire Western Hemisphere supply chain from that part of the world. That's why things like the CHIPS Act was so important for us to be able to come back and be able to develop boards and things that we need for everyday life, not just militarily, but when we start our cars, when we do anything that's, related to our day-to-day lives. But they've taken it a step further. We know that they're increasing tax, trade, and tariffs when it comes to the Panama Canal. We know that they're actually expanding out the Communist Manifesto, that they're perpetuating throughout Venezuela with the Chavez, or Pedro in Colombia, or the Hondurans who have now been turned away from doing business with Taiwan at the behest of the CCP. And then we've got Cuba, which is only 90-plus miles away. We're being encircled. And that encirclement is simply because they want to not just cut off our Western Hemisphere supply chain, but it's the old saying of, how long can a nuclear submarine stay underwater? Until it runs out of food. That's why they're buying up our farmlands. That's why they're going out and spending $6.1 billion around our military bases. That's why they're flying spy and surveillance balloons over to gather intel to see what our actual feasibility and vulnerability studies will be. And these are scary times. And I'm all for the idea that if we wanted to truly be able to engage in our adversarial nation, we don't do it kinetically. We're not supposed to be the world's police any longer. We're supposed to be taking care of the homeland and ensuring that America and Americans are safe and prosper. And so my view is that we should be thinking about how do we economically grow ourselves. And I think that's through things that we're doing right now, like H.R. 1 and H.R. 21, which is really unleashing American energy. You see, China's goal is to eliminate the U.S. dollar from being the global currency, and we're seeing this as they go and advance themselves in OPEC to try and eliminate the petrodollar to be replaced with the petro-yuan or the petro-ruble. And this is an attempt to try and throw us into hyperinflation because they know that right now we have a national debt to GDP that's sitting at 129%. Now, for many of us who are business owners, if your account payables are 29% higher than your account receivables, you are insolvent as a business. You won't last long this way. But that's what we are as a nation. And as we continue to try and creep towards this financial debt ceiling, I'll be the first to tell you that the idea of driving up the federal credit card on the American taxpayers is not something that I'm willing to do. Until we can go through our discretionary, indiscretionary, mandatory spending, as all of us who are business owners have done a line-by-line item, until we can understand that just like in our businesses, you get to a size of growth where you can no longer cut yourself to profitability. The only way that you thrive and grow is to actually win more work, get more business, and have more contracts. We need to address that exact same thing with America and treat America as a business, because that's what it is. We can't cut our ways to prosperity. We need to be investing in our domestic growth. We need to ensure that our industrial base is strong once again. We need to take control of our supply chain issues. We need to address workforce shortages and immigration. We need to secure our borders and start looking at how do we actually get back to American exceptionalism and that industrial drive that we once had. This is how we defeat our adversaries, because the one thing that we're not doing right now, and we won't, we will not outpace our adversaries militarily or economically without investment at home. Great news, right? And so for many of us, one of the things that I talk about is that if we know that our adversaries are out to eliminate our U.S. dollar from trying to be a global currency, if we understand what the path is that they want to take with regards to economic resource warfare, if we understand that cutting off Western Hemisphere supply chain is a primary goal through the Road and Belt Initiative, then we need to understand that the world as we know it has continued to evolve to a point where the dollar, the yen, the baht, the dinar, the ruble, this is not really the true global currency. What is the true global currency is energy. And that's why this 118th Congress is very focused on the idea of not just going ahead and driving down our independent fuel costs, but getting control of our spending on things like I call cash diplomacy. As you know, our State Department and our USA continues to spend hundreds of billions of dollars giving money to countries who absolutely attest the American as being the ones that are arrogant. Now, this idea of cash diplomacy and paying a country $800 million to be our friend doesn't make them our friend. It just makes them $800 million richer. I mean, at that point, I almost want to be upset with the U.S. and see if they'll cut me a check. But we have to understand that one of the best ways that we can build reliance and to build our allies to be a stronger asset to America is to provide reliable, cheap, and cost-effective gas, things that we have an abundance of like LNG. Look at the actual supplementation and utilization of nuclear energy, which is one of the safest and cleanest mechanisms that we can have. Look at continuing to try and get around EPA, one of those things that all of us have had to deal with that are burdensome and tries to regulate our businesses and how we even develop our own land and have them get around for a waiver that we can do where we can build our own refineries, which we haven't done since 1976. There's a lot that needs to be done, and I'll be the first to tell you, I've never run for office before, but Congress as an institution has failed, and it is broken. It does not address the day-to-day issues that Americans really have to deal with. And I'll be completely honest, the 21% approval rating that Congress has is very generous. I would have put it in the single digits. Because we've done a lot of talking, and we talk about wanting to be the majority. We talk about wanting to try and govern, but when we get in, it's messaging bills and partisanship and prioritizing what looks good for our independent party, not what looks good for the nation. And that in itself, in my opinion, is a big failure, and why I think that Congress needs to do a better job to come together, not just to show that we're unified in a singular approach to save America, but we're unified as Americans to be able to build our communities, our states, our homes, to be safe, to be prosperous, and to be free once again. This is not a rah-rah speech, just in case you're wondering. So as we continue to go forward, we look at availability of capital funds. We look at the idea of driving down interest rates so that we can try and make sure that not only is money available, but it's not too costly to individual businesses, that you're not forced to go into a high cost factoring capability of invoices in order to try and help your business to survive, to make sure that you don't have to continue to pay for the additional taxes for regulators who are there to actually shut down your business. And I remind people, regulations is a very fancy word for taxation, because every single time they put a new regulation in place, they hire a new 100 bureaucrats to go ahead and regulate you that comes out of our taxpayer funding. You know, I believe in low tax. I believe in the idea of actually going to, if you wanted to say a true fair tax, going to a consumer-based tax. Again, the same year in 1913 when the 17th Amendment came out, your other favorite amendment came, which is the 16th, which was federal income tax. A lot of people would think that that would be the worst of all the amendments, but I would have said the 18th Amendment, which was alcohol prohibition, but luckily we got the 21st in there, so we're good now. And in Congress, I can assure you, you need an abundance of it. But I want to just tell you that when I'm sitting in D.C., not only do I sit with my hat as your representative, but I sit with a hat as a former business owner who understands the issues that we're facing at home, who understand that a strong economy leads to a strong military leads to a strong America leads to a strong and safe or safer world. We are the world's leaders regardless of what we actually want to or not want to do. I'm not an interventionist, but I'm not an isolationist. I'm a protectionist. And I believe that allocating funding back home is top priority for all of us. And I will continue to fight for the necessary earmarks, the necessary appropriations to build our community. I will continue to listen and address the outreach services. I will continue to look at things with our first responders that they have to deal with, like our firefighters who have a shortage on chassis when it comes to being able to address their issues and try and get them to where they need to be. And I will continue to listen to what you need me to do up in D.C., because that's really what matters. We're all business owners and understand that, and so the first thing you should understand is I am your employee. And so with that, as our invocation talked about and the ideas of listening, I'd like to turn this over to have a couple of questions, if I may. And I want to thank you again for this opportunity and for the honor of being able to serve you here in the Florida 7th District. God bless.
Thank you so much. So we opened it up to questions earlier this week, and we had more than a dozen submitted. So thank you guys for submitting those questions. And
I'm sure they're going to be easy.
We're not going to get to all of them, but let's start off with a question about veterans, since we've heard about supporting them in their entrepreneurship efforts. Are you aware of any plans to overhaul the VA system and make it work better for them?
So I've actually been in contact with Chairman Mike Bost, who's a great guy. He's the chairman of the Veteran Affairs Community. One of the things that a lot of people don't realize is that prior to 2022 elections, only 17% of all of Congress was made up of military veterans. 17. Now, in the 80s, it was a little over 70%. And the problem is not that Americans or congressional members don't care about our military or care about our veterans, but the issue is that having not served in uniform and understanding what our needs are, it's hard for them to allocate and appropriate the money in the right way. For those of us who are in the military, it's the same equivalent when we'd get equipment that would be procured from someone who doesn't actually go into the field, and we'd look at it and be, what the hell is this? And how am I supposed to use it? And it's the same way in Congress. So we are looking at VA overhaul. We are looking at the ideas of ensuring that we get the necessary tools and kits. And one of the things that I talked about was that we don't need to continue to spend, as an example, $100 billion on a new VA hospital in a metropolitan area that has 9 other capable hospitals. We just need access and the same level of cares. We need to be utilizing that $100 billion to actually go into the urban areas. And so getting the necessary ability to try and get hospitals over VA into rural areas where you don't have to drive an hour and a half and 2 hours, the idea of being able to utilize the existing echelons of care that are available to us in our own cities and districts, I think this is a great first step in opening up a platform that allows us to have more visibility and to address more of the issues, but also to allocate the necessary funding into TBI, PTSD, and other types of mental health issues for treatments. One of the things I've seen recently, which is incredible and very, in my opinion, encouraging, is the hypobarometric pressure chambers, where we've actually seen 100% turnaround for those with TBI and PTSD who's actually gone through one treatment. So the idea that we can continue to invest in these things, the idea that we can continue to have people in Congress who understand military veteran needs and transitional needs and mental health capabilities, because as I just spoke with at VEI thinks they're serving a purpose of entrepreneurship, but in reality what they're doing is they're actually giving military soldiers mission and purpose. And that's all we ever want. Military vets are very simplistic. We're very old-fashioned. We want to have mission and purpose, and we want to be able to do protection and provision of our family. And if we can't do those things, we don't have purpose, we don't feel there's a reason and a use for us here. And so the VA is addressing these issues, not just for suicide prevention and awareness, but TBI and PTS utilization, TRICARE extension, VA overhaul for utilization of our existing echelons of care, and hopefully getting the wait times down to where we can get treated the same way that we got treated when we were in the military. We were willing to wear that uniform and die for this nation. Our nation should be willing to do what they have to do and die for us.
We had 2 questions about Ukraine, and you briefly spoke about Ukraine, but can you explain your position on Ukraine funding and then about helping Ukraine citizens coming to the United States?
This is one of those very difficult issues because for far too long, our foreign and domestic policies that are intrinsically linked have been wrongfully handled. In 2014, when the Russians first came in, we had something that we could have utilized that I advised on called the 94 Budapest Memorandum. I know you've all read every page of it. But what essentially this was, it was a nuclear nonproliferation agreement that was signed by the Federation of Russia, the United States, the Ukrainians, and also the UK, Northern Ireland, that said that if you give up your nuclear arms, that we will recognize, identify, and protect the sovereignty of Ukraine, to include Crimea. We didn't utilize that annexation violation. We didn't utilize the United Nations Security Council or our international treaties to be able to say we should levy certain types of sanctions. And in fact, we just considered it to be a red separatist incursion. Now, I'm not trying to be partisan in any way, but I will say that this is under the Obama-Biden administration, where we could have taken appropriate action to have prevented what we're seeing today. And also in recognizing the fact that over 4 years ago, I was already talking about the great superpower resurgence and the gathering of the geopolitical alignments from Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea, knowing what China's ultimate goal is as a single-point hegemony. So we've handled this poorly the whole time. And then when we finally got involved under the Trump administration and started providing javelins because they needed javelins, we held up on HIMARS. And then all of a sudden, okay, we're going to give HIMARS. Now they got HIMARS, even though they needed A-10s or other type of aircraft. Now it's, okay, well, we'll give the tanks that we weren't going to give before. I'm not anti the idea of trying to help those in need, but I like to identify issues that are actually true to America. And the reality is that the issues that we're seeing in Ukraine really should have been handled by the EU and should have been handled by Germany and Italy and France, the same 3 countries who failed to meet their 2% of GDP agreement every single year in NATO. And as many of you know, NATO was created for a single principal cause, which was to try and ensure that when the Soviet Union expanded out, that NATO was there to answer. And meanwhile, the countries that are most threatened by Russia's invasion are the ones who don't even pay their 2% of GDP and expect the Americans to shoulder the brunt of the actual responsibility. You know, America pays 3.47% of our GDP into our NATO, even though we're only allocated or needing to pay 2%. That's over $800 billion increase to what we're actually supposed to pay. In addition to that, we've actually allocated another $113.4 billion to the Ukrainian war. In my opinion, this right here should have been better spent on things like securing our own border 900 miles away before securing the border of something 9,000 miles away. And I also recognize the fact that as we continue to fund, the thing that you don't understand, as a president, what is Zelensky's incentive to try and get to a peace deal whenever he knows that he's going to continue to receive more and more money each time? So this is perpetuating the war. And again, this interventionist ideology, this kind of neoconservative, neoliberal stance on things has not advanced America's economic growth and stability. It's contrary to what we actually need to be doing. You know, the last time that we've actually won a war and handled things correctly was in World War II. Back when we understood that the invasion and the growth of Nazi Germany under Adolf Hitler wasn't a European issue at the time, when we allowed France and Belgium and everyone to actually try and address these issues independently in their own sovereign way, until the point that I got to the UK and we recognized that it was now a problem that couldn't be stopped. We came in, we were the victors. We even utilized war bonds back then, which actually didn't cost the American people money but made us money. And guess what? It's the last time we've had a declaration of victory from war. You see, the idea of just running in, spending more and more money has become something that the rest of the world has gotten accustomed to. So now when a conflict occurs, the people who should actually be acting sit back and go, don't worry about it. The Americans are going to spend their money. This is not a path that we need to continue on. And so it's for that reason that not only did I co-sponsor a bill that does 100% audit on every single dollar that has been allocated to Ukraine that is visible to the American people without the Freedom of Information Act, because we're stewards of the taxpayers' money. We can't continue to talk about debt ceiling increase, economic downfall, devaluation of the dollar, inability of sovereignty, and at the same token say, oh, but we always have plenty of money for every other nation. So I think that until I can understand with the remaining $80 billion that has been appropriated prior to my time in Congress, what the military strategic objective is, what U.S. natural interests that this actually secures, and how it actually improves and helps America, I couldn't go on record and actually support any additional funding without it actually having a purpose that serves the American people.
We have time for one more question.
By the way, apparently I was told I was pro-Putin because I'm pro-America. So, you know, this is the risk that we continue to run. And again, this is my whole thing. The European Union needs to come together and do their job. Germany has put themselves in a very difficult position. As you know, she was the one that was laughing at President Trump whenever he asked to pay her 2% of the GDP for NATO. But she was also the same person over the last 20 years who broke her entire energy independence by eliminating their nuclear and coal energy to be dependent upon what? Nord Stream 2. The Russians. So there is a bigger geopolitical and economic stance there. And while I support everyone's independent sovereignty, while I recognize the atrocities across the world because I've seen them, whether it's in the continent of Africa, whether it's sitting in Nigeria with the Boko Haram, whether it's sitting in Somalia with Al-Shabaab, whether it's the Russians who are invading in with the Wagner Group, we recognize that this happens across the world. But each independent nation needs to be able to go ahead and govern, embody, and protect themselves, or utilize their alliances, or utilize their European unions, for example, to be able to protect and govern themselves so that we, as Americans, I'm elected to serve the American people, not the Ukrainian people. I'm here to serve you in this nation and ensure our borders are safe, our economy is strong, our military is there, we're not being depleted, we're not being run down, our businesses have the necessary assets, resources. That's my job. And so, I hope that no one takes offense to the fact that I prioritize America over any other nation.
One more quick question. We're going to bring it closer to home now. What current legislation do you think would benefit Seminole County and be popular among both parties? Tough question, I know. Well,
no, actually, that's a very easy question. I think that we're all about ensuring we have economic growth. So, you know, one of the things I just talked about was the $5+ million for the Sanford Orlando International Airport. You know, this could be a key business hub. It has a railway that could provide necessary supply chain utilization. It has the business commerce sector that could be built up to offer other areas. We could look at some type of a taxation hub to encourage business, as you see in other nations. You know, this is the type of thing that I would love to see, is where Seminole County becomes the business hub of Central Florida. And it encourages them to utilize our businesses and our assets and our resources. But the other thing that is not a partisan issue is the idea of housing affordability, the idea of ensuring that we have lower insurance rates, the idea of making sure that our dollar stretches and goes further by not continuing inflationary and out-of-check spending. So these are the types of things that we're looking at right now, which is to try and ensure that we utilize the resources here at home to build up a strong economy, that I'm able to appropriate and allocate and support the local businesses in the area, that they can grow. Businesses like I just referred to, like Decimal, who is a niche, unique company who can actually address things that no other business is doing. So I think that when we look at things like this, and oh, by the way, huge shocker, because apparently, it's funny when you run an election. When I was running in the Republican primary, I was a rhino, and all of a sudden I became a MAGA extremist the minute that the general came. But the reality is that I'm one of the first Republicans who's actually looking to co-sponsor a Democrat bill called the ENDS Act, who is also by a new freshman down in South Florida, Ms. Sheila McCormick, who is a absolutely fantastic representative. And the ENDS Act basically would go after the idea, who remembers when President Trump had passed the bill to ban the vape refills for the candy flavored that was targeting children? Remember this? Well, the vape and the tobacco companies just said, oh, well, you said that was for refills. So now they create the disposables, which isn't applicable to it. So Sheila McCormick and myself were actually sponsoring something called the ENDS Act that would actually target the disposables as well for the candy-flavored vape sticks that are actually targeting our children, to ensure that we eliminate this from our communities. One thing that's not partisan is the protection of our children. One thing that's not partisan is economic growth. One thing that's not partisan is a freer and safer community. And so that's why I'm happy to do things like the DC crime bill that we just passed, which is really the reason that we did it for DC, is because if we can't keep the actual nation's capital safe, how can we expect everyone else to be safe? And I can tell you, once again, to sing his praise, Sheriff Dennis Lima, who's actually the president of the Sheriff's Association, who spends a lot of time having to be in DC and update people on what's actually occurring, probably has one of the best rehabilitation programs. And if you don't know about this, and correct me if I'm wrong, where are you, Brian? Sorry. The reflex, oh, there he is. Reflex, things like this. His idea is actually promoting the idea of not continuing to try and fill our jails and our prison systems, but not because of not violating, or not prosecuting crime, but because of having true rehabilitation. As world leaders, as we consider ourselves, do you know the only two things that technically we actually are the world leader on? I'll give you a hint to number one. I just talked about it. America is the highest per capita incarceration rates in the world because we've turned it into a business stream, and that was never what it was intended for. So getting in touch with criminality, making sure that's safe, making sure that we do bills that are actually improving economic growth, investing in our local airports, making sure that there's appropriations for SBA and the small business associations, making sure our schools are protected, and making sure that we identify the things like CRT and DEI that are actually indoctrinating children as opposed to looking at civics and the ability to write in cursive. These are things that I don't consider to be partisan. We're now to a point where it is not about Democrat and Republican. It is not about socialist versus conservative. We're now at a point where I view it as America versus anti-America.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your time today. We so appreciate you being here.
Thanks for listening. To learn more about the Seminole County Chamber, please visit seminolebusiness.org or check us out on our social media at Seminole County Chamber.